Hello and welcome to Anti-Union Rhetoric and the Fight for Workers' Rights. My name is Elizabeth Hoover. I'm an assistant professor in the English department, and I don't study unions, but I have a personal connection to unions. I'm the child of two union members. My mother went on to become a lawyer for unions, and my father was a member of the newspaper guild. And my mother was raised by a single immigrant woman in an impoverished town called Apollo, Pennsylvania. It's now a Superfund site. And her mother was active in the union there. She worked in a fiberglass curtain factory, and she was part of an effort to get the factory to stop piling the finished curtains in front of the emergency exits so that there would be safe exit during a fire. She came home one day and was so proud to announce that she had been promoted to management, which was a huge step for a person living in poverty. And then, of course, the next day, as a member of management, she didn't have the protection of the union and she was fired. So I do have a emotional connection. The other connection I have in terms of my studies, for my own academic studies, is I focus on LGBTQ plus literature and studies, and there's a deep history of LGBTQ plus union organizing and collaboration between these groups. I was going to talk a little bit about a notable incident with Coors Brewing. In the 1960s, workers were active in trying to unionize Coors, and this culminated in the strike of 1977. But starting in 1973, partially because of Howard Wallace, who was an openly gay Teamster, the LGBTQ plus community in San Francisco led a boycott against Miller Coors, and no gay bars would serve Miller Coors. Harvey Milk, who I'm sure you all have heard of, coordinated the boycott and then worked with the Teamsters to lead an effort to hire more openly gay drivers, as well as they worked together to defeat the Briggs Amendment, which was an amendment meant to make it illegal for gay people to teach in the public schools. So it was this. The scholar Tammy Gold says that this is the first public demonstration of the links between class and sexuality, but I think that might not be correct. Leslie Feinberg chronicles intersectional activism in their novel Stone Butch Blues, which depicted union organizing in the late 1950s and 1960s. And I wanted to read a passage. I'm going to refer to the main character, Jess. Their gender is never nailed down, but in this, they're identifying as a butch. And there's an outdated term that Feinberg uses to refer to butch women. It was time to find a factory job. The butches urged me to try to get into steel or auto. Of course, I already knew that. I wasn't a damn fool. The strength of the unions in those heavy industries had won livable wages and decent benefits. But Edwin said there was more to it than that. The trade unions safeguard job security. She told me that unlike a non-union shop, if she had a run-in with a jerk on the plant floor, it didn't signal her last day on the job. You couldn't be fired just because some foreman didn't like your face. With union protection, all the butches agree a she could carve out a niche and begin earning valuable seniority. Now, later in the book, Jess has a run-in with one of those jerks and loses their finger in an accident. And Duffy and Walter are two cis straight men that are active in the unions I work with, Jess. The next thing I remember was being in a car. Walter had his arm around me, Duffy was driving, and he kept turning around to look for a sign from Walter. My whole hand was bound up in a red soaked cloth. I felt so sorry for my finger that hot tears of grief ran down my face. I was thinking maybe I should bury it. I wonder who I should invite. Walter lifted my injured hand up high with one of his large, gentle hands and held me tightly against him with the other. I shook violently. It's going to be okay, honey, he crooned. I see a lot of these things happen. It's going to be all right. The next thing I knew, I was lying on an operating table. I panicked. What if they took my clothes off? There was no one around. A fly buzzed around me and landed on my hand. My body lurched. The fly circled and landed again. This time, as my injured left hand jerked, my finger seemed to move in a different direction. I passed out. It was Duffy's face I saw as I drifted back to consciousness. He was smiling, but he looked upset too. Duffy, I whispered, where's my finger? He winced. It's okay, Jess, they shaved your finger. I didn't think it was true. I'd seen lots of movies where they lie to injured people like that. I lifted my head slightly to look at my hand. It was covered with layers of gauze, and there was some sort of metal device running from my forearm into the gauze and then emerging at the tip where my finger would be. Duffy nodded. Your finger's okay, Jess. The bone wasn't completely severed. He turned away as he said it. I thought maybe he was going to throw up. I was still dressed in my bloody work clothes. Get me out of here, Duffy. He stopped at the pharmacy to fill my prescription and drove me home. When I awoke, he was gone. There was a note on the nightstand explaining when I should take the pills. He also left his phone number and said I should call when I woke up. I was relieved to find I was still in my work clothes. I called him later that night and he raced over. Jack set you up, Jess. Duffy paced around my kitchen. Just before we put you on that machine, one of the guys saw Kevin removing the safety device. I had trouble following what Duffy was saying. It wasn't just that my mind was hazy with painkillers. I didn't want to understand. I felt woozy with fear. It reminded me of when my parents had me committed or the cops opened my cell door. So many people in the world had so much power to control and hurt me. I shrugged as though it wasn't important. Look, Duffy, it's over. Besides, the contract's up in 2 months. We got other things to worry about. Duffy looked at me like I was crazy, but when he spoke, his voice was calm. No, Jess, we're going to worry a lot about this. We're going to prove what Jack did to you, and we're going to tell management either he's out or we all walk out again. I marveled at the idea that straight people would stand up for me, or for any he, she. You know, Duffy added, I don't think I really realized how hard it is for you. I know what jerks the guys at work can be sometimes. He leaned up against the sink and folded his arm. But when I went to the hospital with you, I saw how they treated you, how they talked about you. He rubbed his face. When he looked back up at me, I saw tears in my eyes. I felt so helpless, you know. I kept yelling at them that you were a human being, that you mattered. And it was like they weren't even listening to me. I couldn't do anything to help you, and I couldn't make them care for you the way I wanted, you know. I nodded. I did know. And now I knew that Duffy did too. Oh, I advanced your slide. So I love this book, Stone Butch Blues, because it then goes into this beautiful description of this intersectional organizing where Duffy and the other union organizers understand now that people like Jess's experience and the other Butch's experience on the line is very different, as are the Black women at the end of the line and the white women in the middle of the line. And I think one way we could read this is that unions in a way transcend identity. But I think a different way to read it is not that unions transcend all other identity, but that they remind us that worker is part of our identity. So that's my opening spiel. And now I'm going to go into housekeeping. Also happy election day. I'm looking out. I'm not seeing a lot of I voted stickers. You know, I'm a city voter, so we had 2 referendums. I know if you're in Webster Groves, if you want an aquatic park, y'all better get your butts to the polls. because there's a referendum for an aquatic park. And if you're here because you're interested in union rights, I know sometimes it can feel like national elections are the most important, or they're the most covered in the news, but smaller elections are sometimes won by a handful of votes. And municipalities, counties, and states pass individual laws around workers' rights and minimum wage. And it also controls who's on the school board. And so what students maybe learn about the history of unions in school. So that's my pitch, vote. Okay, here's the housekeeping. That was supposed to happen before my spiel. We're already off. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the panelists by reading their bios. Each panelist will talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. As the moderator, I'll start off with 1 or 2 questions to give you a chance to think of questions. And a quick announcement for my creative nonfiction students. You're not here as students learning about unions, you're here as reporters, right? So what are the questions you need to answer to get at the who, what, where, why, how, when, where? All right, don't change the page. Okay, so we're going to start with Allan MacNeil. Allan is a professor of political economy with a joint appointment in the departments of history, politics, and international relations and business at Webster University. He teaches a variety of courses in political economy and economic history. Prior to earning his PhD in economics, Professor MacNeil received a master's degree in labor studies and worked as a union organizer. He stays active in local labor issues as a member of the Workers' Rights Board of Missouri's Jobs with Justice. And then next up will be Harley West. Harley is an English major, graduating fall 2024. Grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, a lifelong Chief fan with a passion for environmental and fiction writer, along with any and all kinds of animals and living things, particularly box turtles. Always looking to learn more and grow and for new books to read, he joined Starbucks in 2022 and has since gotten involved with writing and organizing communications for the Union Committee. And then finally, Vix Beals is a game and game design major, graduating in spring 2026. She grew up in a small town outside of Belleville, Illinois. She's got passions for learning, activism, writing, and, as her major implies, gaming. She began working with Starbucks in late 2023 and began involving herself with the union shortly after. And if I could just share a story, when Vix got hired after class, she showed me her union button and it made me really proud. Okay, Allan, you're up. Oh, I'm sorry, Professor MacNeil. Allan.
Okay, welcome. I'm happy to be here talking about unions, and I'm going to talk about the historical and political context of the historical moment we find ourselves in. And I want to make 3 points. I hope will be clear. One is that we are at a crucial historical moment in the history of U.S. labor relations right now. Second, that history shows that improvements in working conditions only come about from worker activism and organizing, right? They're not given to anybody, you have to fight for them. And third, all this worker activism and worker struggles are met with employer resistance always. So some may call this a class struggle. So I'm going to start off with some good news and talk about some recent union victories and union successes. And so in the past year or so, we've had some very significant labor victories. One with the United Auto Workers, who had a major strike, a very creative strike. They asked for a lot big pay increases, big changes to their contract, and they were largely successful. They're also have announced, they're not stopping there, they've announced they're going to organize Toyota, Tesla, Mercedes-Benz. They're organizing right now Volkswagen in Tennessee. They're calling for a more national movement for a 4-day work week, and calling for a general strike in 2028. So look forward to that and be prepared. They also, creative workers, the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild of America kind of shut down production of movies and television shows for quite a long time. Also very successful, got most of what they asked for, some very significant gains. The Teamsters didn't go out on strike, but partly because there were these other, I think, successful strikes. The threat of strikes got the UPS to settle with them, and they also got big raises. And then more recently, as we'll hear more about after this, Workers United at Starbucks has got a victory in that Starbucks has now agreed to negotiate over a contract. In addition to this, these are kind of some recent victories. There's kind of longer term activity going on in the background that we should be aware of too. One is that Amazon, their warehouses, which are growing, a large and growing employer, is facing great union activity all over the country. Service workers at grocery stores, at places like Starbucks, Trader Joe's, Kroger's, Whole Foods, also organizing. In the tech industry, Google engineers are organizing a union. And in the gaming industry, Activision Blizzard has software engineers there have organized a union. What? And Sega. All right. See, and then we're just touching the surface here. There's a lot going on. Journalism, BuzzFeed, Vox Media, Vice Media, also unions. Higher education, graduate students are organizing, graduate student workers. When I was a grad student at UMass, I worked to organize a union there. I worked for the UAW, and the union is still there, and it's been very successful. Other universities are grad students, adjuncts, adjunct professors. In St. Louis at WashU and SLU, and I believe UMSL, the adjuncts are organized. They tried to organize here at Webster in 2015 and weren't successful. The gig economy, so Uber and Lyft and all the kind of delivery drivers, there are also efforts there to organize them. Also, some kind of really diverse places that you don't think about. The Dartmouth basketball team organizing a union, the Denver Art Museum, a bunch of nonprofit organizations like the Sierra Club also. So these movements reflect a growing awareness among workers today of the importance of collective action, collective bargaining in addressing workplace issues. Now, yes, okay. Also wanted to show that support for unions amongst the public is relatively high. It's been increasing and relatively high. So while there's been this ongoing union activity and more workers are joining and trying to organize, the public is largely supporting them. They largely supported the UAW and some of these other efforts as well. So that's all good news. So right now at this time, there's some significant gains. And I want to talk a bit about the political context and the legal context. Labor relations in the United States are covered by the National Labor Relations Act. This was passed in 1935 during the Great Depression as part of the New Deal. And this, for the first time, gave workers the right to organize unions, right? So it's a legal right established into law that you have the right to organize into unions and to bargain collectively, right? And you have a right not just to join unions, but for concerted activity. So any kind of action by a group of workers protesting or trying to change efforts at work are legal. You are protected for doing that. And you cannot be fired, right, for exercising your rights. And so those are what we call unfair labor practices, that the employer, if they try to interfere, restrain, or coerce you, intimidate you, that's a violation of this act. It's an unfair labor practice. And also failing to bargain in good faith. So if there's a union at the workplace, you have to bargain in good faith with that union. Legally, you're obligated. It also created a independent federal agency called the National Labor Relations Board. And the National Labor Relations Board is responsible for overseeing labor relations and enforcing the National Labor Relations Act and overseeing union elections. So when we talk about getting a union at Starbucks, they had to follow the procedures laid out in this act, go to the NLRB, who oversaw the election. Okay, so that happened, and I want to stress that this happens in 1935, not because businesses thought this would be a good thing or the government thought it would be a good thing, but because there was a major upsurge, a movement, a political organizing of unions, and I would also add political parties like the Socialist Party, Communist Party in the US, but union organizing was massive at this time, and this was one of the results. Now, the political context changed after the Great Depression, after World War II, and there's more kind of a swing back to a conservative approach. And this act was amended. It was amended in 1947 it's called the Taft-Hartley Act. And the Taft-Hartley Act was intended to restore balance and provide employer rights, right? And so it's limited some of the things that workers could do, some of their tactics. But the major thing that came out of this was that it allowed states to enact what are called right-to-work laws. And right-to-work laws say that if you're represented by a union in a right-to-work state, if a state has right-to-work laws, if you're represented by a union at the workplace, you do not have to pay any dues or fees to the union for the representation that they have to provide for you, right? So if a union represents workers at a workplace, they represent everybody. They represent the people that voted against the union. They represent the people who don't want to pay any dues to the union, don't want to have anything to do with the union, right? The union is obligated to represent them. When they negotiate a contract and they get raises, everybody gets those raises. All the workers are covered by a grievance procedure, right? So this law says that those workers do not have to pay the union for providing those services. So as a result, as you can imagine, a lot of people choose not to pay since they're going to get those benefits anyway. It's economics called the free rider problem, right? And so this has the effect of really dampening union organizing, weakening unions, undermining unions. And right now, there are 27 states, so a majority of states in the US with right-to-work laws. Now, point out, I believe Michigan just recently, the legislature there repealed their right-to-work law, right? So I think now it's 26. Missouri, in 2017, our legislature, which you probably are aware, tends to be very conservative, not exactly a bastion for worker rights. And they passed a right-to-work law in 2017. So Missouri became the 28th state. However, there was a question put on the ballots that was the organization I work with, Jobs with Justice, was a major part of getting this ballot initiative question on the ballot to write a ballot question for Missouri voters to decide whether they wanted a right to work law or not. And Missouri voters voted 67% to get rid of the right to work law, which is fairly amazing. And one of the good things about Missouri is that we did that. So Missouri is not a right to work state. Now, all this stuff that's going on, the bad news is that even with all this union activity, positive support for unions, union membership is declining. Right? It's been declining for a while and it continues to decline. Part of it is because the difficulties raised by the right to work laws, but also a big part of it is that employers have been resisting and fighting back and frankly violating a lot of the protections of the National Labor Relations Act, firing workers, intimidating workers, delaying bargaining, not bargaining in good faith. And it's kind of fairly widespread. So it's very, very difficult these days to organize a union, right? We've given a lot of these successes. It's very, very difficult. So those workers that have been successful, right, should be acknowledged that they've achieved something that's very difficult these days. The other thing is this extraordinary effort at unionization has been met with great resistance, right? The NLRB has filed 128 complaints against Starbucks, which we'll hear about, for alleging more than 1,000 instances of illegality, right? Amazon, 250 complaints. Similarly, workers have been fired at Tesla and SpaceX for exercising their collective rights. So how are employers responding? Well, these employers here, and I'll just point out, we have Elon Musk, SpaceX, and Tesla, the richest man on the planet. Jeff Bezos, Amazon, either the second or third richest man on the planet. But also Trader Joe's and Starbucks are also joining in legal efforts to try to have the National Labor Relations Board, which is ruling against them, declared unconstitutional. All right, so this is part of a conservative legal movement against what they call the administrative state, trying to weaken, undermine government agencies' ability to regulate. So the EPA, the IRS, Federal Trade Commission, these types of agencies are being challenged in their constitutionality, and so is the National Labor Relations Board. And they are betting, and probably correctly, that our current Supreme Court will be sympathetic to their arguments, right? And so if it does get to the Supreme Court and the constitutionality of the National Labor Relations Board is on the docket, that will be a big deal. That will, if it is overturned, right? The Supreme Court has in the past affirmed the constitutionality of the National Labor Relations Act and the National Labor Relations Board, but we know that the Supreme Court has overturned precedent, and they could do it again. And if they do that, that will send workers' rights back to before 1935, back to when we didn't have union rights. So at the current moment, there's a lot at stake.
Yeah.
Can you hear me all right? Awesome. Well, I'm Harley West, and I am involved with Starbucks Workers United, one of the many employers you see up here behind me who have been participating in unfair labor practices and union busting tactics. But a little about Starbucks Workers United is that it is organized on a store-to-store basis. So each store that wants to unionize files, votes, and organizes themselves individually. This also means that each store will have their own union contract. As of recently, as in the last 2 months, Starbucks has announced their intent to bargain in good faith for both individual and a master contract for all unionized locations. Currently, there are over 400 unionized Starbucks locations, and that includes over 8,000 employees. When I first joined Starbucks as a barista, I was discreetly asked if I had any thoughts on the small movement as it was then. And when I spoke in favor, I was asked if I wanted to get involved. From there, I helped write our letter stating our intent to unionize, a follow-up letter a year later, and many other written communications to both management and the corporation, stating our asks and demands. When I first got hired, I knew it was going to be an okay job. I got hired at 12 something an hour plus cash tips. I knew other jobs had some more benefits like credit card tipping, a little higher of a wage. But I went to Starbucks because how they pitched for a focus on community, coffee, and connection. This was all found to be false advertising, I very quickly found out, especially due to the fact that shortly after we filed to unionize, Starbucks implemented a 15-hour starting wage, credit card tips, expanded dress code, while also rolling back their supplemental healthcare coverages, such as their healthcare support for their trans partners. Um, this was withheld from all unionized locations. It was never because they couldn't, it was because they didn't want to. Starbucks corporate began to choose profits over customers, partners, and coffee years ago. Now there's starting to be a push for them to return to that. With being a unionized location, I've felt more secure and comfortable in my job than ever before. Not only do I have the legal protections in case an unfair action is taken against me, I have all of my other coworkers who will shed their aprons in a second if it means defending me from another one of Starbucks's unfair labor practices, such as we did for Bradley Rolfe, fired unfairly due to a dress code violation, while others simply received a small write-up or nothing at all. With his termination, there was an immediate call for a strike that lasted through the weekend. As of September, he is to be reinstated with full back pay, a year and a half, almost 2 after the incident. Another large action we participated in was the Red Cup Rebellion, as they called it. That has taken place the last 2 years. Red Cup Day is Starbucks' most profitable day, where they offer a free red holiday-themed cup with the purchase of a holiday beverage. For the last 2 years, we have went on strike on this day, as our value as employees should outweigh this free cup, similar to those we sell for less than $3 year-round. Red Cup Day is infamous for being horrendously understaffed, outrageously busy, and with little support from management. So we stole Red Cup Day back and made it into our largest national strike with over 5,000 participants from locations from all over the United States. With other local unions coming to our picket line, it was a great time, enjoying the company of friends, sitting in solidarity, and enjoying our day for once. However, with our location being one of the busiest in the St. Louis area, the store was opened with management staffing. Plenty of our regular customers who we greet and converse with every day and look forward to seeing even cross the picket line. Crossing the picket line is where you buy from a place that is boycotted or on strike. To us, this showed that their $7 cup of coffee was more important than supporting our cause, that they'd rather see us struggle and stress than be properly staffed and fairly compensated, and refuse to make their coffee at home for just one day. Crossing a picket line is undermining a strike, showing your support for the corporation, and valuing your convenience over supporting the issues those workers are facing. We have went on strike ourselves to support our fellow union stores in St. Louis as well, When our location Page and Ball went on strike for an unfair labor practice, our manager at the time left to insist in keeping their location open anyways. We closed and we were on strike ourselves within 30 minutes. Working at a striking location is also called scabbing. And this comes from the practice of corporation hiring other workers to replace striking ones to keep profits coming in during the strike. We want to stand in solidarity with each other. If they thought it was worth a strike, then we do too. However, the big reason we unionized was to get a contract, an agreement between the union workers and the corporation of the terms and benefits that we get a say in. It has been an uphill battle. The first attempt at bargaining resulted in Starbucks' lawyers walking out on us, refusing to negotiate on any terms. Starbucks has also engaged in plenty of union busting tactics, creating fear to unionize at other locations, dissuading people from working at ours, scaring people away, and blaming the union for these issues. When in reality, Starbucks created those problems because we unionized. I'm glad to say they have seemed to realize how ineffective this strategy was, seeing as they have lost just about every ULP lawsuit that has been thrown their way, and have faced countless calls to rectify their actions. They have now announced their intention to properly bargain in good faith, and a committee of 150 representatives from locations around the United States will finally be traveling to bargain a proper contract.
All right. Hi. Can everyone hear me? All right. I'm Vix. I sort of want to talk about what led me into joining a union and the sort of issues that us young people face in the workforce. But to start off, I want to talk about when I first learned about unions, which was probably when I was around 13 or 14, end of junior high, start of high school. In my history class, we learned about the Gilded Age of America, where monopolies policed Congress and their workers. Very briefly, we were told about unions, and essentially that workers fought back against their bosses, and that was about all we were told. The majority of the section revolved around Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which was cited as the main reason for the end of the Gilded Age. In class, we were told that workers were replaceable and to no real backlash or rebuttal. It wasn't until late into high school that I learned more about labor power. We learned about union strikes and how important they were, but also how they were brutally cracked down upon by corporations hiring private groups like the Pinkertons or using the National Guard. I recall writing a paper about Cesar Chavez and his rhetoric in my junior year. He was a prominent labor and civil rights activist, and I felt I learned more about unions and labor power through learning about him than in all of my history classes combined up to that point. He made me feel that I should be treated better for my work, that rather than just working a job, I was selling my labor. As with most teenagers, I found myself working in the service industry, specifically the food service industry. I worked part-time after school and on weekends, basically most of the free time I had. It felt as though half my life was working and selling my labor. To me and to many of my coworkers, there were two very different atmospheres depending on if the owner was there or not. If he wasn't there, it was friendly, cordial. We got work done. When he was there, it was pretty hostile. Just something simple. While the state mandated that all of us should be given breaks, we were given those breaks, but we were also heckled by our boss for taking them, nickel and diming the whole staff. Like I said, it was rather hostile and harassing when he was around. One of the more tame incidents I remember is a coworker of mine telling me a joke, and of course I laughed at it. I thought it was funny. Big mistake. The owner walked through the kitchen doors right at that moment and cursed us out. He yelled at us to get back to work. Let me see, I lost my place. Yeah, he yelled at us to get back to work and harassed us for that, for laughing. For a bit of context, my work functioned as an event venue. We held weddings, bridal showers, wedding receptions, all sorts of celebrations. And they were often running until or after we officially closed the restaurant. This was one of those nights. A wedding was taking place that night, the wedding reception, and the kitchen, where I primarily worked, was closed. And my coworker and I had already finished many of the closing tasks, which just left us washing plates, silverware, and wine glasses that came back from the reception. This was when he told me the joke, and when I laughed, and right as the owner walked in, and that was right when the owner walked in. He then proceeded to tell the entire staff that was still working that night that my coworker and I were playing grab ass instead of mediating or listening to my explanation. All I got was, I don't even want to hear it. Like I said, this is one of the more abstract and tame experiences I've had over the course of my work at several jobs. There have been times where I felt unsafe to report sexual harassment and homophobic remarks made by coworkers in fear of losing my job over it. I've had physical health issues because of unfair and unsafe working conditions as well. Over the summer, I worked at a local barbecue restaurant in my hometown back in Illinois. As many of you recall, this past summer was the hottest on record. And this region of the country can be extremely humid. The building I worked in had no AC, no working AC, and the owner of the restaurant made no attempt to have it fixed. I was working full shifts, showing up around noon, prepping ingredients, opening, and then staying all the way to close and after, often with no breaks. I remember accidentally leaving a meat thermometer on and setting it near my station, which was about 5 feet away from the flat top grill and fryers. The temperature read 115 degrees. I think it goes without saying that I suffered from heat exhaustion nearly every day I worked there. No one deserves those working conditions. No one. Not me, not you, not prisoners, not people in foreign countries. No one. I joined a union to protect myself and my interests as a worker. I know that if I ever experience anything like those working conditions again, I have people who will stand up with me. If a superior uses an unfair labor practice, my partners at Starbucks will stand up for me. In a heartbeat, I'd do the same for them. I have in the past, even when I haven't been protected by a union. I resigned from my first job in protest, the one where I was yelled at for apparently playing grab ass. A coworker of mine had been fired unfairly and seemingly in a retaliatory manner. Several more of my coworkers, including a manager, assistant manager, and a shift lead, soon followed. I was privileged enough to not have to worry about bills, since I was still living with my parents at the time, but I recognize that many don't have that same safety net. That's why I think unions are important. There was a popular song written in the 1950s called Solidarity Forever. One of my favorite lines from it. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one, but the union makes us strong. Thank you.